all of us need a society where our citizens can trust our society because we have equal justice before the law. That's what Bill's life embodies. That's why we're so honored to have him with us tonight. So please join me in welcoming this remarkable businessman, author, teacher, philanthropist, and authentic leader, Bill George. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. How do you live up to that? That was indeed an honor for such a wonderful introduction. Thank you very much. When Vice President Mondale called and asked me to do this, I said, you know, I don't know how I can accept. I'm not a lawyer. I'd feel like an imposter. And he said, no, we'll accept you. So I appreciate it very much because this is indeed an honor, and it's an amazing gathering. I am very inspired. I'm inspired by the work that you all do, Kathy and Mary, and everyone who supports this organization. Thank you so much for supporting this wonderful organization. I'm inspired by the stories. Be sure to read the stories at your table because they bring it down to the human interest level. I'm particularly inspired by the 4-year-old girl who couldn't get a wheelchair because she was denied by medical assistance. She had cerebral palsy. One of my role models and inspirations at Medtronic for the 13 years I was there was a young man with cerebral palsy and how he recovered from this dreaded disease. He never was cured of it, of course, but how important it is to have justice for all and to have these opportunities. So I know many of you have given to this organization, but those of you who haven't, there are envelopes on your table. And so I'd like to ask you to fill out an envelope tonight before you leave. So Mary, if you just come up and let me give you my envelope. Our state is truly blessed to have leaders like Vice President Mondale, Chief Justice Blatz, Chief Justice Page. How many people do you know that have been a Hall of Fame football player and have gone on to be Chief Justice? Can you imagine something like that? What a remarkable career, and I might say create the Page Educational Foundation, which has been so important to so many people and to serve as a mentor and role model. And I look around and see so many of you that have been mentors and role models of mine. And I think it's important that we all do that in our work and that we encourage the next generation to come along and restore the greatness of this country and have Minnesota continue to be a great leader in our country. I think that fairness under the law is an essential principle in which we operate, and how else can it be? So tonight, I'd like to talk about the notion of restoring trust in capitalism. But before I do, let me just say a little story on Ambassador Mondale. I was 2 days ago, or yesterday, talking to a Harvard Law School graduate who is head of one of the nation's largest banks in New York, and he is an advocate for rights for all people, including those who are gay or have sexual preference other than other sexual preferences, and asking him to come out here and talk about the marriage amendment, because he told me that he believes that this is a civil right. And I know Wheelock Whitney has been a real pioneer in this field. And he said to me, he said, thank you. So he said to me, he said, I don't understand people in Minnesota. He said, this is the state of Mondale and Humphrey, great citizens and great leaders of cause. You know, everyone remembers Hubert Humphrey in 1948 when he talked against, he talked in behalf of civil rights. He said, I don't understand you people. How could you pass a constitutional amendment to ban forever same-sex marriage? And I was thinking that once upon a time, we also had laws banning interracial marriage. And I have a son who's married to a woman whose parents are from the Philippines. Now, wouldn't it be a tragedy? And he was married here in Minnesota. Wouldn't it be a tragedy if we put these things in our Constitution? So I'm not going to say anything more political because that's not about politics. No, it's not about politics, okay? It's not about religion. I'm a Christian, and I think a church can do what they want to do. But I think in terms of rights for all under the law, we need to separate these things, and we need to ensure that everyone has equal rights under the law. So thank you for that. I said my title today is Restoring Trust in Capitalism. I'm an unabashed capitalist, okay? I'm proud of capitalism. I think, why do I feel that way? I think free market capitalism in this country has created great value for all people. And when I see the corruption of capitalism and the damage in many cases it's done, it pains me greatly. In fact, since I left Medtronic 10 years ago, I always had a goal of trying to work for the company that was doing good for other people and helping other people, and I found that at Medtronic. And the last 10 years, I haven't led anything, but what I have been doing is working towards the whole notion that we can have better leaders of our organizations who in the business community. Why do I say that? Because I see this, and in fact, go all the way back to my first book, Authentic Leadership, which was called Creating Lasting Value for Everyone. And I really believe capitalism at its best has been a great creator of value, sustainable value, and wealth for its employees, its customers, its owners, and its communities. And we are privileged by society to have the freedom of capitalism. I served on the board of a French company, Bull. Honeywell had 34% ownership at the time, and I remember the day in 1981 when François Mitterrand was named president of France, and within a matter of months, that company was nationalized, and we no longer had the freedom to operate. So we should never assume these freedoms that we have in this country, and that capitalism is a privilege, it's not a right, and I think we have to honor that by serving all of our stakeholders. And I've seen the distortion of capitalism. So I'm going to say some things that will provoke some of you, may upset some of you, because as I understand the law and as I understand the purpose of a corporation, it's to serve all of its stakeholders, its owners, its employees, its customers, and by the way, in society. And that means if we create externalities like pollution and discrimination and problems we create in our corporation, if Medtronic creates products that harm people, it's our obligation, not just by enforcing the law, but it's our obligation to repair those and take responsibility for those. And I think we have the opportunity to create win-win solutions. It is not a zero-sum game, so it's not a question of dividing up an ever-shrinking pie like some of our economists think. But capitalism also rewards risk-taking, entrepreneurship, creativity, and innovation. Medtronic was founded by Earl Bakken and his brother-in-law. We had 2 employees. Today, Medtronic has 45,000 employees, the largest percentage of which are here in Minnesota. And I think that is so important that we continue to provide opportunities for people to do good. You know, we wonder about how can a young entrepreneur who founds a company called Facebook out of his dorm room and is now 27 years old and is going to be worth many, many billions when Facebook goes public. Why is this right? Well, I can tell you it's more right that Bill Gates or Steve Jobs does that than it is someone who's making it inappropriately. And these are people that have taken the risks, and somebody hits the jackpot. But I was watching a video this morning of Mark Zuckerberg, and where he's now using that vehicle, if you will, for organ donations. And he got the idea from his girlfriend, and he's now using that as a vehicle and creating thousands of organ donations of people that could otherwise donate and weren't. So I think we can look at continuing to foster creativity in our state and throughout the nation through our system. But you know, it doesn't exist everywhere in the world. We have many places in the world where people say that they operate with capitalism and really don't. Rex Tillerson, the CEO of Exxon, was in Moscow a year ago, and they asked him, Mr. Tillerson, when is Russia going to get some respect in the world? We have a thriving economy. We're doing lots of good things. And he said very bluntly, he said, when you follow rule of law. And there are many places that do not follow rule of law, and you don't know what the law is. And I think no matter what kind of system one has, whether it's a communist system, a socialist system, a capitalist system, a democracy, I think it's essential that we have the principle of rule of law be operating, and I think we're going to have to work towards that. And we have distorted in many ways what capitalism was intended to be. And I think we've thrown out the balance between, if you will, the law and leadership. And I think we need to build up both. And I've been admittedly focusing on the leadership side, but I think we need to do both. The reason I went to Harvard Business School is because our dean asked me to come there and start and work with a group of very senior faculty members creating a course called Leadership and Corporate Accountability. It was what I call a post-Enron course. And the notion was that we had to teach people about the law, about ethics, and about economics, and how these three things came together. It is not just strictly a situation of getting away what you get away with. I think we've seen over our lifetime, we've seen some outstanding laws. Some of them have gone away. I think one of the laws that we repealed in 1999, Glass-Steagall, did a lot of good. And I think one can make a fairly strong case that the repeal of Glass-Steagall created many of the problems that we saw in the meltdown of 2008. The problem is, when you get that genie out of the bottle, how do you get that genie back in? That's the real problem we have, and we're struggling with that right now. And so, I know people find certain laws controversial. Let's take one, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. I think it's done more good for American corporations than many, many of our laws. And you know why? It's because when you go into China, you go into Russia, you go into Nigeria, okay, I'm on the board of Exxon, the world's largest oil company. When you go into these countries, you know the rules of the game. There are no payments. There are no favors. There's nothing done. And pretty soon they stop asking. You know, if you get into that game, all of a sudden you lose sight of what you are. I spent quite a bit of time with Peter Loscher, the now CEO of Siemens. And here's one of the great corporations of the world who auditors found $1.8 billion in cash bribes. And they took another $2.5 billion in fines under the SEC and the European community and legal fees. That included $854 million in legal fees they had to pay, and terminate some 400 people in senior positions with the company. Why? Because they didn't follow the rule of the law. The law had changed, and they didn't change with it, you know? And everyone said, well, that's kind of the way it is. No, that's not the way it is. And that's not what you need to do business. And Peter Loscher told me something very interesting. So I want you to think about, one of my colleagues at Harvard talks about, where is bribery legal? What country is it illegal in? The answer is none. There are no countries in which it's legal. There are many countries in which it's practiced, but that doesn't make it legal. And, you know, Loscher told me that they summed up all the contracts they had won that they paid bribes on, because they had the audited data. He said, I want to go back and look at the profit and loss statement for all these contracts that amounted to where we paid this $1.8 billion in bribes. And there were thousands of them. You know what the answer was? We lost money. We'd lost money. That was before all the $2.5 billion in fines and legal fees they paid, because they weren't selling what the company was. And he got them back to selling technology and service. That's what the company is. And so I think that's just a small example of how a law can do great good for companies and set our standards higher than the rest. I used to have people say to me when I would go to certain countries, well, Mr. George, you know, we're losing contracts as we don't pay. And I said, I understand. You'll lose one, you're going to get two. So just get over it and get on with trying to sell what this company is. But I think we've seen this distortion of capitalism. Unfortunately, and I'm going to say something's going to be unpopular with a lot of you, but our most famous economist of our lifetime, Milton Friedman, in 1970 wrote a very famous article that's become the basis for a lot of people, economists' belief and a lot of lawyers' belief about what the purpose of business is. And he goes on, he says, when business people believe that business has a conscience and takes seriously its responsibilities, this is a direct quote, takes seriously its responsibilities for providing employment, eliminating discrimination, avoiding pollution. In fact, these business people are preaching pure and unadulterated socialism. Well, I said I was a capitalist. I guess that makes me a socialist. We have a responsibility to society. We're chartered by society, like that company on whose board I served in France some 30 years ago. We lost our charter. In the United States, we tend not to take charters away. We just pass laws that narrow your freedom of action. Because when business, we live in a democratic society, when business violates that, we narrow that freedom of action. And I think we've had a distorted view of capitalism, and I think we've really gotten away from it. I think we got to a point of, Look, I believe in sound regulation. I don't believe in no regulation. Okay, we want to have medical products coming to market. We want to have drugs we need to save our lives, or medical devices. We want to have food, but we want that food to be safe. And so there is a valid reason to have sound regulations and have them properly administered. Unfortunately, we've fallen into many ways into almost a crony capitalist system now, where you hire a group of lobbyists, you hire a group of people, go to Washington, and you get your way. And unfortunately, and this, some of you disagree, because I know the Supreme Court's the law of the land, but when they support the idea that you can give unlimited campaign contributions, and you've got a casino dealer out in Las Vegas is already giving tens of millions of dollars to support individual candidates, don't tell me that there's not a quid pro quo with that. I think we need to rethink some of these things.